The Jo Cox murder trial hears from the police officers who arrested the man accused of her killing. The jury heard that Thomas Mair said, "It's me," when police approached him. We'll have the latest from the Old Bailey. Also this lunchtime, unemployment falls and the number of people in work hits a record high. Most new workers added to the workforce weren't born in the UK. Calls for the RSPCA to be stripped of its powers to routinely prosecute animal welfare cases. The end-of-life care that's under threat, with 3 out of 5 hospices in England facing cuts to funding. The massive sinkhole in Japan that took a week to repair. How long would that have taken to be fixed here?
Here, Portsmouth's Gunwharf Quays is evacuated and ferries stopped following the discovery of a wartime bomb in the harbour. And prisoners only out of their cells for 45 minutes a day. A report says Winchester Prison must improve.
Good afternoon and welcome to the BBC News at 1. The trial of the man accused of murdering the MP Jo Cox in June this year has been hearing from the police officers who arrested him after she was attacked. PC Craig Nichols told the Old Bailey Thomas Mair, who's 53, had a gun in his bag when he was arrested. Mair, who's accused of shooting and stabbing the MP for Batley and Spen, denies all charges he faces. Daniela Relf is at the Old Bailey. Daniela.
Well, Simon, the West Yorkshire police officers were the first witnesses to give evidence during this trial. They told the court that although unarmed, they were the officers who detained Thomas Mair on June the 16th this year, less than an hour after Jo Cox was attacked. They are the police officers who arrested Thomas Mair, the officers who found him close to the scene of Jo Cox's death. The MP was attacked outside Birstall Library last June as she arrived for a constituency surgery. She was repeatedly stabbed and shot 3 times. As eyewitnesses and colleagues tried to help Jo Cox, local police were immediately deployed to find her attacker, knowing they were looking for a man possibly armed with a gun and a knife. PC Craig Nichols told the court he and a fellow officer were in a marked police car. Both were unarmed. He described stopping Thomas Mair, who put his arms in the air and dropped the holdall he was carrying. They were on Ryesdale Avenue in Birstall, less than a mile from where Jo Cox was attacked. Fearing he could be armed, the police officers then rugby tackled him to the ground. PC Nichols told the court that during the arrest Thomas Mair had said, "It's me," and later, "I'm a political activist." This was the gun the police found in the holdall Thomas Mair had with him. The police officers said the defendant had told them it was there. But his defence barrister has questioned the evidence of the police, telling the officers that Thomas Mair said nothing at all during the arrest. Well, later we are due to hear further evidence from eyewitnesses and more detail about the computer searches it's alleged Thomas Mair made the day before Jo Cox died. Simon.
Daniela, thank you very much. The rate of unemployment has fallen to 4.8% of the working population, its lowest in more than a decade. The latest figures show the number of people in work hit a new record, but productivity grew only slowly. The figures also reveal that the vast majority of the new workers added to the workforce were not born in the UK. Our economics correspondent Andy Verity reports.
Construction is one of the key industries that's added new jobs, with more than 100,000 people starting work in the past year. Unemployment is at its lowest since 2005, and the workforce keeps growing to new records in spite of the Brexit vote.
We do face a period of adjustment as we leave the European Union, but Britain is still the same outward-facing, bold, ambitious, internationally connected country it has always been. These jobs figures today show great confidence in the economy, with companies continuing to create jobs, continuing to take people on, continuing to invest.
Since the referendum, the workforce has continued to expand, as has the economy, and immigration is a big part of the reason. Unemployment fell to 1.6 million in the 3 months from July to September. Meanwhile, the estimate suggests 461,000 new workers joined the workforce. The vast majority, some 430,000, were not born in the UK. This Barnsley company uses lasers to cut precise metal parts for the engineering industry and other customers, and it's relied on immigrant labour to expand. But now it's worried it simply won't be able to find the skilled workers.
It is kind of a worry for us with the country as a whole and in this area, that if more migrants are either stopped from coming or are going home, and we don't have high levels of unemployment, are we going to get to a point where we've simply not got enough people to do all the work that we need to do?
If we're restricting migrant flows into the UK, there's less supply of workers, and that may well push wages higher. So it's okay if you're here, but not great news for a business that's struggling to find the skills that it wants.
While the labour market's improving, the amount produced per hour, also called productivity, is hardly growing, up just 0.2% in the 3 months to the end of September. If that fails to improve, we may be heading for a slowdown. Andy Verity, BBC News.
Syrian activists say that there's been no let-up in airstrikes on the rebel-held east of Aleppo a day after they resumed. They say at least 20 people, most of them civilians, were killed when barrel bombs were dropped in several districts. The renewed bombardment was allegedly carried out by Syrian government and Russian warplanes, but Moscow has denied any involvement. Andy Moore reports.
The aftermath of more bombing in Aleppo this morning. Children on their way to school are caught up in the violence. The rebels claim that schools and hospitals have been targeted in the raids. At least 20 people are said to have been killed and more than 40 injured so far today. Washington has condemned the resumption of the air raids, calling them a violation of international law. The white helmets of the Syrian Civil Defence Force have once again been busy. They say the eastern part of the city has been attacked by 4 helicopters and 3 warplanes. There have been 3 weeks of relative peace in Aleppo, but this is now the second day of a renewed offensive. More than 250,000 people are said to be trapped in the rebel-held eastern side of the city. And this is the view from the other side of the city, the western side, held by government forces. Russian journalists were escorted on a tour of the old town by the Syrian army. This man has managed to keep his shop open. He says some soldiers living nearby buy products from him and guard him. He says he used to have 4 shops on the other side of the city, but the militants burned them down. The Russian military claims it's not attacking Aleppo. It says its offensive is concentrated on what it calls terrorists in Idlib and Homs. Andy Moore, BBC News.
Labour is calling for government action to address what it calls a crisis of credibility facing the independent inquiry into child abuse. It follows another resignation of Aileen McColgan, a senior lawyer who was leading investigations into Church of England and Catholic churches. She left because of serious concerns over the inquiry's leadership. The independent inquiry has been hit by repeated setbacks, including the resignation of 3 of its chairwomen. Our assistant political editor, Norman Smith, is in Westminster. It does look increasingly controversial. Some would say shambolic, this inquiry.
Well, Simon, Theresa May and the Home Secretary Amber Rudd today both stressed their absolute confidence in this inquiry. But I have to say, I suspect they are part of a diminishing band of MPs at Westminster where there seems to be growing scepticism because, in the space of 2 years now, we've had the resignation of 3 chairmen, the lead counsel for the inquiry, several other lawyers, and now the decision by the woman in charge of this absolutely critical investigation into alleged abuse in the Catholic and Anglican Church also to go, prompting Labour to demand that Theresa May intervenes to redraw the remit of the inquiry, to make it much more focused, because at the moment it's investigating pretty much every area of public life stretching back over 25 years. They're also seeking reassurances about the staffing and structure and progress of this investigation. In the Commons, though, Theresa May pretty much rebuffed any such idea, insisting she would not intervene.
We owe it to the survivors and victims for the inquiry to continue. And I have to say, having seen the work that Professor Alexis Jay has done in the Rotherham inquiry that she undertook, I have absolute confidence in her ability to undertake this inquiry.
The difficulty is this, Simon. Theresa May fears if she intervenes, that would be to compromise the independence of the inquiry. She also fears it would deflect from the inquiry's focus on protecting the interests of the victims of child abuse. Labour argue her failure to intervene risks ensuring the inquiry continues to fail the victims of child abuse.
Norman Smith, thank you. MPs are calling for an overhaul of the rules governing the importation of animals as pets into the UK. The aim is to target illegal puppy farmers in Eastern Europe. Between 2011 and 2015, there was a 2,000% increase in the number of dogs entering the UK from Romania. The report also called for the RSPCA to be stripped of its prosecution powers in England and Wales, as Claire Marshall reports.
Puppy heaven. This is how they should spend the first few weeks of their lives, cared for by an experienced breeder. It's easy to see why so many of us want one. Today's report estimates the annual trade in puppies in the UK is worth up to £300 million a year. But the MPs say puppy farmers in Eastern Europe are helping to meet demand. EU pet passports introduced in 2011 provide a vehicle for their illegal importation.
So are we really a nation of animal lovers? We may think so, but the reality at the moment is that we're failing to properly protect our pets.
The report recommends that the third-party sale of dogs should be banned. All internet pet adverts should have to include the registration or licence number of the seller. The age that dogs can be brought into the UK should be increased from 15 weeks to 6 months.
Hello, sweet pie. Hello.
Breeders also feel people looking to buy a pup should be much more careful.
I feel quite angry, but at the same time it's the people that are buying them. They don't do their homework, they don't do their research, and most importantly, they don't go by recommendation.
The MPs also looked at the role of the RSPCA in the protection of pets. They say the charity should just do investigations into cases of animal cruelty rather than taking people to court because of potential conflicts of interest.
The RSPCA do some great work, but should it really be a charity that prosecutes, that investigates, that campaigns and fundraises?
Everyone has the power to undertake a private prosecution. We also do it very, very well. We have a 92% success rate. 90% of the public think that we should carry out this role.
The government must now decide whether to make the changes that today's report says will help to keep our pets more safe. Claire Marshall, BBC News, Weston-super-Mare.
Britain still has a deep social mobility problem, and almost half of the country believes that background is the key to success. That's according to the Social Mobility Commission, which found that more than 50% of adults thought children from privileged backgrounds were more likely to get a university place than those from less well-off homes. And half thought those children would have better career opportunities. Gillian Hargreaves reports.
When I leave school, I'd like to be a pilot in the RAF.
I would like to progress on to sixth form and eventually become a doctor.
And I'd like to be an actor in the film industry.
The Oasis Academy in Oldham is working hard to help children believe in themselves and become what they want to be. But today's State of the Nation report suggests that too many young people see their ambitions crushed. To combat this, the school arranges visits to top universities like Cambridge.
There was people there from different schools and most of them were quite posh and they went to high-end schools with good education, and sometimes I'm scared that because I don't come from an area like that, I won't get into the university I want to get into.
See if you can remember where those napkins go.
They even teach fine dining etiquette here to raise self-confidence. 60% of children at this school live in families with incomes of less than £16,000 a year.
Next, please.
And those in work struggle to make a living, like the school cook, Tracy Gilks.
I have now had to take on a second job. Even though I have my own mortgage, I have had to take on a second job to make my bills more affordable to me.
There are too many towns like Oldham, with poor schooling, few job prospects, young people drifting away. The report says families with incomes of £22,000 a year are working harder than ever just to stand still. The result? We've become a society of haves and have-nots. There are moves to narrow the gap, But the Social Mobility Commission says change is too slow.
It is really important that the government now puts its money where its mouth is, and that, importantly, it drives forward reforms to our education system to make it fairer, reforms to the housing market to make it more affordable, reforms to the labour market.
At the Oasis Academy, there's a belief that even if life deals you a less privileged hand, a good education will pay dividends. Gillian Hargreaves, BBC News, Oldham.
It's just after 1:15. Our top story this lunchtime. The Jo Cox murder trial hears from the police officers who arrested the man accused of her killing.
And coming up, we'll be shining a light on our ancestors from the Dark Ages. These remains could be from one of the most complete Anglo-Saxon burial sites ever found in England.
And in South today, disruption in Portsmouth as shopping centres evacuated and ferries brought to a halt after a wartime bomb was found in the harbour. And non-league Eastleigh pull it off, beating Swindon to progress in the FA Cup.
They're there to provide quality of care to people with terminal or life-limiting conditions and to support their families as they reach the end of life. But many hospices are facing a crisis because of cuts to their funding. 3 out of 5 in England had their government funding frozen or cut last year. That's according to new research by 2 charities. NHS England says it's for clinical commissioning groups to prioritise and provide healthcare services in their local area. Jane McCubbin spent the past few weeks at St Catherine's in Preston to get a sense of what's happening as the squeeze takes hold.
Nobody knows how things are going to work out, do they?
Derek doesn't know how long he's got, but he does know he's in the right place.
Fantastic. It's home to me, this place. It's fantastic.
It's our first visit to St Catherine's in Preston. Derek and his family have allowed our camera in because they want to tell us about their experience here.
We took my dad down to the chapel in the wheelchair and he got very emotional, didn't he, Cameron?
My dad's not an emotional person, and I think he felt comfortable that he could let things go, you know, and it was nice.
Do you think you would have been able to have any of those moments if you'd have been in a hospital?
No, absolutely not. No.
Staff at St Cath's, they tell me, are angels.
Well, it's actually a privilege for us. We get so much back, we get so much out of it.
But all of this costs about £5 million a year. And a week later, I'm back to hear the man in charge say all of this is under threat.
The challenge has never been greater, the challenge is extreme, and I would say that the current situation challenges the viability of the hospice movement.
A 7-year freeze in funding is actually a cut in real terms of around £400,000 a year. They've already made redundancies. Are there more difficult decisions ahead?
There are more difficult decisions ahead, yes there are.
So they've had to rely on their 750 fundraisers and volunteers to do even more, to raise cash in new ways, like the cafe. Gillian's been here since the start.
Right.
It's your dad that brought you here?
Yes, it was. As a family, we were obviously upset because my dad was in the hospice, but it turned out to be a lovely family, positive time.
Did it really?
It did. And my dad would have loved it.
And that's why there is always a waiting list for beds here. Demand keeps growing as funds shrink. More people are dying of cancer year on year. Karen, an outpatient, knows that she will be one of them.
I miss that. Who knows how much longer I've got last, so do you just sit me in a chair and let me shrivel up? It's quality of life. It's not the length of life, it's how quality your life is. And this helps you to realise what you can get out of life.
Who's that?
Downstairs in the inpatient ward, Derek has rallied. He brought his pet dog Jess in for a surprise visit. Of course, it's good news, but it's bittersweet.
That's a good news.
Because Derek is still dying, and demand for his bed is such that he might have to leave to make way for someone much closer to death.
There needs to be more of this, not less of this. If this place wasn't here, I don't know what would we have done. I don't know what we would have done.
Jane McCubbin reporting there on the latest in our series on cancer in the UK. Initial findings into the cause of the Croydon tram crash are due to be published this afternoon by the Rail Accident Investigation Branch. 7 people died and more than 50 were injured when the tram derailed and overturned a week ago. The driver has been questioned and given bail. Richard Lister is in Croydon for us. Richard.
Simon, I'm standing just a few hundred metres from where that tram came off the rails at that sharp corner in the track last week, becoming the worst tram accident in the UK for 100 years. This section of the track remains closed, though we have seen trams testing the rails over the course of the morning, and investigators do have a much better picture now of what happened last week. They've spoken to survivors and witnesses, and crucially, they've also been studying the data from the tram's black box data recorders. Now, the investigators had already said that the tram was travelling significantly faster than the 12-mile-an-hour speed limit on that section of the track, and in today's interim report we should get a better picture of exactly how fast it was going. We should also probably find out whether there were any mechanical issues with the tram, and of course any safety measures that need to be implemented as a result of last week's accident. This report will only be fairly brief. It's an interim report, perhaps around 10 pages long. There'll be a much fuller report in a year to 12 months' time. Transport for London have said today it will pay the funeral costs of all the bereaved families. And of course, Simon, everybody really wants to know what happened last week and how best it can be prevented from happening again.
Richard Lister in Croydon, thank you. The president of the International Olympic Committee has admitted that there are deficiencies in the system for dealing with doping among athletes. Thomas Bach told the BBC sports editor Dan Rowan that the IOC was ready to invest more in the fight for clean sport.
When you look back at this year, do you have any regrets? Anything you'd do differently if given the chance?
In general, no. You always have in your day-to-day issues, I think, the challenges, and there may be sometimes in the run-up to the games and during the games we were a little bit strict with our the Brazilian friends, but at the end I think it paid well off. With all the other major decisions that we have been taken, we have such a broad support there to take the Russian decision.
There was criticism too, of course. It wasn't just support.
I mean, this is freedom of opinion, you know. But
and how did you handle that personally? Was that a difficult moment for you?
I was always sure because there, with this decision, we are defending our values. We should not take a political decision. We should take a decision which is doing justice to the athletes. In this point, I don't have any regrets.
What is your vision for the future of anti-doping?
WADA anti-doping system, which is independent from the sports organizations as well as from national interests, where an independent entity determines with the international federations an anti-doping program, not only per sport but per discipline.
If you were really serious about clean sport, would there not need to be a huge increase in investment into anti-doping?
We are ready to increase, and we will address this with the governments. I'm confident that with this proposal the athletes will regain their trust in WADA and the anti-doping system.
Well, you can see the interview between sports editor Dan Rowan and Thomas Bach in full on the BBC News at 6 tonight. Snap, the firm that owns the instant messaging service Snapchat, is reported to be preparing to float on the US stock exchange. The company, which has more than 100 million daily users, could be valued at between $20 and $25 billion. The BBC has announced its biggest expansion of the world service since the 1940s. There will be 11 new language services and an increase in television, mobile and digital content. The expansion is a result of the funding boost announced by the UK government last year and not funded by the licence fee. The first new services are expected to launch in 2017. Now, for those of you annoyed at the length of time it takes to fix that pothole at the end of your road, a story that will impress and perhaps frustrate you in equal measure. In a typical demonstration of Japanese efficiency, a section of road in the centre of Fukuoka has reopened only a week after a massive sinkhole opened up. Alexandra Mackenzie reports.
It began to crumble, disintegrate, and then this section of road just disappeared. Taking with it the zebra crossing, street lamps and traffic lights. It swallowed part of a street which spanned 5 traffic lanes and left a hole 30 metres wide and 15 metres deep. No one was injured when the road caved in, but local businesses were affected and there was disruption to electricity, gas and water supplies. As the exposed cavity began to fill up with sewage from damaged pipes, engineers knew that it had to be repaired quickly. But just how quickly would such a massive sinkhole be fixed? Well, this was the extent of the damage last week, and this is what it looks like now. To make this happen in just a matter of days, it was a 24-hour operation. The hole, thought to have been triggered by subway construction in the area, was very quickly filled in, using tons of wet cement and sand. Then the road was resurfaced, the zebra crossing freshly painted, and there was a final clear-up before it was reopened. So just 1 week after a massive sinkhole closed this road, it's almost as if nothing actually happened. Alexandra Mackenzie, BBC News.
Now to some digging that we are good at. Archaeologists believe that they have discovered a grave containing some of Britain's first Christians. The Anglo-Saxon cemetery in Great Ryborough in Norfolk was excavated by Historic England during the summer, but kept secret until today. Ben Ando is in Northampton for us. Ben.
Yes, Simon. Well, these here are the remains of an Anglo-Saxon woman. She was about 30 when she died, roughly 1400 years ago. Now, her grave and those of 80 other people were found by a landowner in Norfolk. But archaeologists say that while this is an incredibly complete burial site, what's really exciting is not just the bodies, but also the amazingly well-preserved coffins.
Picking away into the past. These bodies, and just as importantly the coffins they were laid to rest in, mostly hewn from a single tree trunk, form part of the most well-preserved Saxon burial site yet found. And the reason for that is water.
If we bailed out the whole of that coffin...
For 1300 years these graves lay below the water table on the Norfolk Fens, keeping them almost intact. And they have an additional significance. Lying on an east-west axis, undecorated, and with simple wooden markers, they may be among the first in England of a people in transition from the pagan rites of their ancestors to a new religion.
We're talking about early Christian burials, so we're talking about when does Christianity come in, when are these people buried, when do they start adopting these Christian traditions. It's exceptional, really. It's very, very exciting. When Christianity starts arriving in the UK, when people start practising as Christians, is really, really important.
The graves were revealed when the landowner started digging out a lake, but unearthing antiquity comes at a price. He estimates it's cost his family up to £200,000.
13 years we've been building this farm up as a family, as a holiday let destination, swimming pool for locals, fishing, the conservation. We're now, I've had to remortgage, but we've done the right thing.
The graves were excavated during the summer, but only now is the find being made public. The bodies and the coffins have been moved to the lab for further analysis. 3D scans, DNA tests, dental checks, carbon dating. This pathway into the past could have many more secrets to share.
Well, that work is still ongoing, but I'm joined now by Jim Fairclough, the lead archaeologist, the project supervisor. Jim, why is this, in simple terms, so exciting to people like you?
Well, what's most exciting about this is that basically these are the only preserved examples we have of coffins from this period. And basically there is a presence of wood in earlier Saxon cemeteries, but all that survives is staining in the soil. So what these wood coffins represent is basically a transition from more pagan practice into earlier Christian cemeteries in the mid-Saxon period.
And what were these people like?
That's hopefully what we find out a little bit through further analysis, through DNA, isotope and dental analysis. We'll be able to work out who's in the cemetery, what their lifestyle was like, and how are they related to one another.
Great, well thank you very much indeed. So what will happen now though is that the coffins themselves are kept underwater. They're going to be slowly and carefully dried out, and then they should go on display at the Coastal Museum in Norwich. Back to you.
Bernardo, thank you very much. One of the world's most extravagant weddings is taking place in the South Indian state of Karnataka. The daughter of an Indian mining tycoon is getting married in the city of Bangalore at a reported cost of nearly £60 million. The bride and the groom performed their Hindu wedding rituals in front of 30,000 people. Preparations for the event have taken months, with Bollywood directors brought in to prepare the venue. But the wedding is controversial as it comes as millions of Indians are struggling to get their hands on cash after the government last week suddenly declared old banknotes invalid. Less of a worry for some. Let's have a look at the weather now. Stav is here, Stav.
Thank you very much, Simon. I thought I'd start off with this lovely autumnal picture. If you are fortunate to get out and about to enjoy these lovely autumn colours, the weather is pretty good for some of us. But don't be deceived by the temperature. It looks quite warm there. It is turning quite chilly across many areas, and we're seeing plenty of showers rattling in on a strong westerly wind. Now you can see the blue colours creeping their way southwards. We've still got the milder air across the south and the southeast, and that's how it will remain through the course of the afternoon, with sunshine and showers for all of us, and in fact brighter across southern areas what we've seen the last few days, which is a bonus. And still the mild air there as well, 11 to maybe 14 Celsius, though it was slightly warmer than that this morning, through the afternoon turning a little bit chillier. And there'll be plenty of showers further north and west, but you will notice behind that cold front, really chilly air, temperatures in single figures for most places, and some of those showers falling as snow over the high ground, some of them heavy hail, thunder, and even some winteriness down to lower levels in one or two places during the heaviest of the showers. Now, this evening and overnight it stays breezy. In fact, the winds pick up even further across northern and western areas, bringing in more showers, plenty of heavy ones there, some snow to the high ground of Scotland, maybe even down to parts of the North Pennines as well. Further south, fewer showers, but it will be a chilly night, particularly central northern areas. Now, I've left the isobars on for Thursday because there's quite a squeeze in those isobars, meaning a windy day, really blustery in fact. That weather front that's also on the map is denoting an area of more prolonged rain which will spread through Wales and England through the afternoon. It really will be quite heavy and quite squally, you'll notice when it passes through. To the north, plenty of showers, the wintry in nature, some hail and thunder, maybe some winteriness down to lower levels as well. And the last day of the double figures across the south, because by the time we reach Friday, we're all into that cold air, and it's quite a blustery day for many southern and western areas, a little bit lighter for many of us, though. So if you are in the sunshine and out of that wind, it's not going to feel too bad. Now, for the weekend, it stays on the cold side. There will be some sunshine in the forecast, but the big news is it'll be wet and quite windy. In fact, a really deep area of low pressure to bring us a very windy spell of weather Saturday night into Sunday. Before we reach that point, though, Saturday starts off on a cold, frosty note, but a lot of dry weather, some sunshine too, maybe one or two showers. Notice, though, behind me, winds picking up across the southwest. This pretty deep area of low pressure will skirt in towards the country during Saturday night into Sunday, and it could potentially be the first named storm of the season so far. So keep tuned to the weather forecast. Simon.
Stav, thank you very much. That's all from the BBC News at 1 on BBC One. We now join the BBC's news teams where you are. From me, good afternoon.